Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's episode brings one of my absolute favorite artists to the show, as Cliff Chiang is here to talk his new book with Brian K. Vaughan, Paper Girls. Thanks for coming on, Cliff.
Thank you, David. I've been a fan of the show and of the site, so it's a treat to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, we're not going to only talk about Paper Girls, but I just want to start there because, it just came out last week and you just came back from NYCC, so I'm sure you have a lot. You had some pretty direct feedback, I'm guessing. What was the response like to the release, both at the con and beyond?
It's been tremendous, and I'm really grateful for it. Coming from the past few years of doing superhero stuff, you really never know about creator-owned books, and this was deliberately a very strange book that Brian and I wanted to get out there, the story that we want to tell. And so it's tremendously gratifying to have people seek it out and to be that excited about it. The con started on Thursday, and already reviews were coming in, and people were just super excited about it. So it's been fantastic. I'm really just overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I mean I think for a lot of fans, especially given how like Saga's blown up and everything like that, seeing a book come from Brian K. Vaughan is obviously always going to be really exciting. But having, it's you and it's Matt Wilson and it's Jared K. Fletcher. You guys have worked together before. Brian's worked with Matt and Jared too, I believe. And it's a superstar team. It's just like really fantastic. And it comes, not to go totally fanboy on you, but I love the first issue. I thought it was fantastic. And
Thank you.
I'm curious, from your side of the equation, how did the book come together? Like, at what point did you enter the Paper Girls equation?
Brian and I have been wanting to do stuff for years. Ever since we did like a short thing in Swamp Thing story 15 years ago, and it was one of the first things I drew professionally. But we really clicked on it, and years went by though, and nothing really. It's just like ships passing in the night. We just couldn't get our schedules together to do anything. And a few years ago, he was like, "Hey, like Image, I'm gonna go talk to Image about doing some books. It's like, would you be interested at all?" And I was like, I'd love to, but I'm working on some stuff at DC right now. Brian Azzarello and I are supposed to do this Batman, noir thing, and I'll but hopefully we can do something again. And then it took until Wonder Woman was ending, and I was wondering, gee, what am I going to do next? And then I got an email from Brian again. I was thinking, he's off directing Under the Dome, and Saga's doing great. He doesn't need any more on his plate. And he sent me an email. He's like, "Hey, look, if you're still up for doing something, let me know." And so it was perfect timing.
Yeah, no, and it's obviously has come together really well. But one of the things that stood out the most, like I love the visuals of the book, but you worked with Matt Wilson on colors. He was your colorist on Wonder Woman, and he's just a phenomenal colorist. What makes him such a fantastic colorist to work with from your perspective?
Matt is someone who always keeps storytelling in mind, and that in and of itself is like, it's rare to find. He combines that with an incredible like level of taste, so that when he is coloring a page, he's approaching it, one, how do I get the most impact out of this story? How do I keep people coming through? Which is something that I think about as I'm penciling, and I'm sure Brian thinks about when he's writing the book.
Right.
So as a storyteller, we're all simpatico, and then he brings his own skills to the table. He's got a really, he's willing to try a lot of things. He's willing to talk to me about trying different things. And then when I make suggestions to him, he's also really open to it. So he's fantastic. I love working with him. He's a great guy. And I hope to keep, like working with everybody here, just because it's, they're all great.
Yeah. There's these two moments in the first issue where like, Erin is going totally fanboy on Mac, or fangirl, I guess, and she's like super hyped about something. Like the first time it happens is when she finds out that Mackenzie is the the Mac, the icebreaker of the paper girls, and like
Hmm.
there's like this flourish of color behind her, and it's like this theme that plays out twice in the book, where it's like when she goes super fangirl, the same color is like totally omnipresent behind Aaron, and it's just such a nice little touch. I love like the additions that Matt does that a lot of other colorists don't do, but as far as like aspects like that, and also just like the design of the book with Jared, how closely did you guys work together in kind of figuring out how the book will look before you guys got started?
Yeah, very closely. I mean, a lot of it was things that we had talked about doing for years. When it comes like specifically to things like, you know, um, those panels you just mentioned with Matt, those are things that we've done in Wonder Woman
Mm-hmm.
as well, but they're less noticeable because I think because of the context. Um, Whenever we can, for moments like that, it's better to go less literal,
Mm-hmm.
and to have these kind of abstract colors in there because it denotes that something has happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's like having it's the color equivalent of having like lines radiate from them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I talk about often, and Matt can kind of read my mind about when those should pop up now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we do talk about that a lot. And with Jared, I told him what I was thinking the logo could look like, and then just kind of sent him some reference, and then he came back and it was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the kind of thing where I think if you have people that you like working with and that you trust creatively, you have to communicate clearly with them and then let them go do their thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
they come back with something that's awesome because they were allowed to kind of go and have their space to work on it and do their best work, as opposed to kind of just riding on top of everybody all the time and nitpicking this and that. Which isn't to say that I didn't talk, and kind of edit things throughout, especially on this first issue, so that we would get the tone right.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, but they're doing such fantastic work, and once you nail it, then
Yeah.
you can kind of go from there, and everyone can do their own thing.
I have to imagine it'd be really hard for you to do your job if you had to like, I mean, you have to have trust in your team to be able for you to, focus on what you're doing and, realizing the story in full on your side too. So I have to imagine trust is a huge part of any project in that regard.
Yeah, I used to work in editorial at Vertigo for a couple of years, so I'm actually used to talking to
Yeah.
everybody on the team to make sure that the end product is something that everybody wants and is fulfills kind of the intentions of the creators. So I've always done that on just about everything I've worked on at DC.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that's not generally the case. A lot of times, you put together a team and they don't really talk to each other,
Mm-hmm.
because the editor is the main point of contact, and it's not for sometimes it's not for lack of trying, but other times people just feel more comfortable talking to the editor because they know them and they might not have a prior relationship with anybody else on the team,
Right.
and they're not sure whether they'd be stepping on toes or whatever to go and talk to the writer directly, and that kind of thing. you know to me, you end up with a lesser quality product because your creators aren't talking to each other, because they're not like, so many things can be cleared up with a conversation or an
Mm-hmm.
email, and it often doesn't happen. Then you get like, a comic that doesn't make any sense, you know,
Yeah.
um, but but I tried to do that on everything that I worked with, simply because I had that familiarity with the process, and felt comfortable just calling people up.
Yeah. It works like that in every environment. I work in an advertising agency, and sometimes I'm always like, why don't you just come talk to me about that? It would be so much easier. It would fix everything. But like that is one thing I'm curious about, and this is just kind of a more general statement, not something you necessarily have answers for. But it is curious. I'm always interested as to whether or not most creators when they're being trained up at Marvel and DC when they're working there and everything, they're used to, like you said, used to working with an editor, and it's kind of like their pivot point, and they may never actually interact with the people that they're working with. And I wonder if there's a difference between like if there's a difference between that and how a creator owned book comes together. So for example, you worked on Wonder Woman, and granted, it seemed like you and Brian and the rest of the team had a lot more leeway than, the average book might get. But how was that experience of bringing Wonder Woman together different than Paper Girls? Was there a difference for you, really?
Not really. I mean, I try to, approach all the projects with the same level of like passion and commitment.
Sure.
So, like, in a way, putting that team together there didn't feel that different. It was all people that I either already loved working with or wanted to work with.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Matt, so it just made sense. Jared and I used to share a studio together,
Mm-hmm.
and I love his work, so it just made sense for us to work together. It'd be easy to just literally just look over his shoulder and be like, yeah, okay. So, and with Az, I already had like such a long relationship with him that it was a no brainer to do Wonder Woman. We had and we had a lot of fun doing it.
Mm-hmm. You brought up the fact you're an assistant editor at Vertigo before, and that's one thing that I find to be really fascinating because it's where how you started your career. How did that happen? Was that like a choice you were deliberately making to help you kind of figure out how the sausage is made, so to speak?
Yes, I wanted to pencil comics. I wanted to draw comics, but I knew my work wasn't quite good enough, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me to kind of like just have a day job and then work at night to do sample pages and try and break in.
Mm-hmm.
If there were other ways I could work in the industry, certainly working as an artist drawing comics wasn't a given, and then it was really really competitive. So if there was another way for me to be involved in the production of comics, I was interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
So having an English degree and having a certain number of connections in comics because I'd interned at Marvel one summer,
Mm-hmm.
it made sense for me to try and go through editorial as well, because I did like the book, and I did want to learn more about the process of making comics. And if it turned out that I would never be good enough to draw comics, then I'd be okay, helping other people make comics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like at editorial you would kind of you touch on every element of a comic, so
Hmm.
it's like you would understand how they work more in a holistic sense rather than just being a penciler or something like that. So I have to imagine that type of knowledge would be really helpful, you know, with your career going forward, not just on Paper Girls, but on everything, because I don't know, I guess I kind of feel like sometimes context for, some people in comics of like knowing what the other people do would help a lot. And I have to imagine
Yes.
a lot in that regard that others don't.
I've always tried to approach this, making comics from the viewpoint of like, what is the other person's job? How can I make that easier? What am I doing that's, either, hassling them or making things take longer? Like, how can we make the whole process, just smoother and more efficient and better? Because that makes it easier to create. That makes it
Hmm.
easier to be creative because you're not dealing with little annoyances all the time, so, and part of me also just wants to know, just kind of intellectually curious about how things get done. Like,
Hmm.
I feel fairly confident that if I wanted to put together my own book, like, and do everything from soup to nuts, I could do it,
Hmm.
um, and that's because I've had an interest in, how does the lettering work? How does the coloring work? How do you get stuff ready for pre-press? So in a way, like, it's been a long time coming, but finally working at Image on a creator-owned book, I do know, enough of the process that, I feel comfortable and don't, have to rely on, say, a larger publisher, to kind of fill in the cracks and have people going, doing this or that.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard people refer to like working at Marvel or DC as kind of like comics college. It's like where you really, you pick up exactly what it means to be like a professional artist or writer or whatever, that you have to hit deadlines, and you start picking up on all those important things that you don't think about if you're just crafting like a webcomic or something like that. But to me it kind of seems like editorial would be like the master's class. Like it's where you're picking up on every element to make sure that you're able to um, see it as a whole rather than just like your individual aspect. And you know, do you think that has that carried forward quite a bit in your career, in like just how you um, handle like your own personal scheduling and like how you handle your process and everything like that?
I think so. I mean, in a way, it's all I've ever known.
Yeah,
I don't know how I would approach it differently, but it
that's
does give me a structure, to base everything else on, and I learned so much with, from all the great editors I worked with, Stuart Moore and Axel Alonso, and Shelley Bond. And it's, I saw the way they worked and I could apply, things, tricks that they had and saw how they tried to mold, stories from, kind of the top, starting with the writer and then preserving that through the penciling process, making sure they, the storytelling was there. And if it's not there, how do you fix that?
hmm
I mean, maybe the best thing about working in editorial is seeing how many ways there were to fix things, if something went wrong.
hmm
Oh, that's a little weird. Well, let's move this balloon and then, address that. And maybe that person should say something else, So I got a sense of how kind of malleable the product could be,
hmm
but at the same time, like you wouldn't, but it would still preserve the what you wanted out of the story. So you get to learn kind of really the nuts and bolts of how it all goes together. And then, and so I'm always very aware of like, oh, well, when I get a script from Vaughan, like it's very considered. He's not a throwaway kind of guy.
hmm
Like it's all there for a reason. And so, when I'm drawing, I try my best to bring all that out of it. And that's my editorial stuff. It's not just drawing what he's written. He's very collaborative in that, if he says that, if you see a better way, then do that. And lots of people have been like that. Azarello was like that as well. He's like, if you want to do something else, do it. So, I read the script several times and then try to approach a script and the page to get the most out of it,
hmm
to get the most out of what they're writing. I can see what nuances they're going for. Hopefully I've read it enough times that I'm not missing any like subtext.
hmm
But I think if you live with it and really immerse yourself in the story and there's enough like heart to it, then like that stuff does reveal itself. And then you get things that kind of connect in weird ways too.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing I'm curious about, because you know the Paper Girls is taking place in 1988, and there's a lot of era specific elements in there, like in Aaron's room there's the Monster Squad poster, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's like I really enjoyed the fact that there was like a Far Side calendar. As somebody who used to have those Far Side calendars, it was an excellent nostalgic throwback for me.
I think we all did. I think that's the thing. Everybody had one of those Far Side calendars. It was in the house somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember like I'm not going to say that it was the entire reason, but I kind of feel like to a certain degree I learned how to read partially because of those calendars, because I was like, ooh, pictures, and
Yeah.
and then I
Yeah.
would read from them.
Right, and
Uh,
then you'd end up reading a calendar, and then like you'd be like the end of it, and you'd be like, oh, there's no more, and then you'd have to go find a Far Side book or something like that. But like you'd be sitting there, kind of just destroying this calendar,
yeah,
because you would never read it, day by day. No, what child has that ability to like hold off on reading it when, especially when it's just sitting there in this big stack.
yeah, yeah. My mom actually, I remember, I think she was trying to teach me patience, and it was not working whatsoever. She's like, wait till tomorrow to read tomorrow's comic. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do
Yeah,
it.
it's so easy. You just flip it up, and you're like, I
Exactly.
like
There's
that one,
more.
right?
I don't have to wait. I know tomorrow is coming, but I want to read tomorrow's comic now. But for those details, like how much of that came from the script, and how much was that just you trying to, kind of get the details of the world right?
It's some of the details are in the script. Other ones I'm kind of culling based on the other stuff that's in the script, and then just kind of picking stuff from my own childhood as well. There was the Monster Squad poster was Brian's call. Like I'd never seen or heard of Monster Squad, so I actually have to watch it. But luckily, it's on Netflix. Um, uh, and the Far Side calendar as well. So but those were definitely like cluing me into what he was looking for with this character,
hmm
what they liked, so there are other, you know, specific things that I just put in because I remember them or they reminded me of something, so like her boombox and the tapes and,
hmm
the Depeche Mode poster on her wall and the telescope. And like, this is someone who's, you know, curious about things, and had maybe wants to be an astronaut, and so having those things in there, just drawing from the whole issue, from all the character work that Brian had already laid in there already, and just trying to enrich it with the visuals.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so if I remember correctly from another interview you did, I think that you came onto the project fairly early. Like, how much of the development of the characters was like you and Brian kind of going back and forth and figuring out, like, Aaron would definitely look up to Kristen McAuliffe, and like would like those details, were those things that you guys were kind of sorting out together and figuring out the characters as you were
Somewhat,
moving along?
yeah, somewhat. Brian had sent me the pitch for the book, and he's like, "Hey, if you hate this, let me know, and I'll come up with something else." But I loved it. I thought, like, this is really different. This isn't what I would have imagined at all that he would bring to me. But at the same time, I was like, oh, this this could be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I also knew that, like, I would be picking it apart if someone else drew it, because of all the 80s stuff and because of my like knowledge of it, because of the way I generally hate how, like, how people like look back on the 80s now. And it's not like out of like a love for the time period that I grew up in. It's just out of familiarity. It's like, if you're going to get it right.
Right. Exactly.
So I knew that, yeah, just about anybody else, it'd be very hard to kind of do it to my level of satisfaction. So I was like, well, then I should really draw the book if I care that much about it. So he had the girls' personalities, just one or two sentences about each. And then we talked a little bit more. Like, he's like, is there stuff that, you really want to draw, or like, is there something you remember? And we just had conversations about what it was like to be a kid then. And
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about, like really being into NASA. I think at the time, I was just thinking of like all the NASA stuff I drew for Mars to Stay, the short story I did with Brett Lewis. And I just, I love that kind of tactile, mechanical nature of all like the NASA stuff. Like when you're in a space capsule, like everything there works. There's no wasted space.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I talked with Vaughan about, just like, oh, when NASA was pretty cool. You remember Space Camp, and then you remember like the Challenger explosion, and those things all work their way in funny ways. There's more things that might come out from our conversations later. So he had a rough idea of where it was going. I added to that, and then he, I think he's kind of adjusted and kept it pretty organic along the way.
Yeah, my wife actually went to space camp when she was a kid, and still has her like kind of, I don't know, not full out astronaut suit, but she has her astronaut suit, and
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like she would probably enjoy this comic. She would definitely see a little bit of herself in Aaron, especially because she kind of grew up in that time period. But you said familiarity was a big part as to why you would have like noticed kind of the cracks if somebody else did it possibly. Did you need to go back and do any research to kind of refresh both in the general aspects, but also in things like your memory of like styles for kids and like how they wore their hair and clothes and things like that?
Yeah, it's been, you have your memories of it, but they do get a little fuzzy, and you start to blend things together. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look back and you think about it, 1988 is a very different time period from 1984, like the heyday
Totally.
of like Madonna and Michael Jackson, and like all the stuff that's going to be in, X-Men First Class 2,
Mm-hmm.
like all that stuff, like those are like, that's what everyone takes away. That's the, the bell bottoms and giant collared shirts, of the 70s, for the 80s, is that you're going to get like all the those things. But 88, you start to move into like the 90s and that kind of boxier,
Mm-hmm.
almost blander thing. So it was really important that, I picked up Sassy, started in 1988, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Probably maybe even like a month before the story takes place. So I bought a bunch of those issues. The fashion in them is kind of so aspirational that, especially for a 12-year-old, that
Uh-huh.
it's kind of, it doesn't really filter down. But I tried to look up like, certain trends in 88. What I remember, my friends wearing, luckily I had my eighth grade yearbook from 1988, which, was great because I was like, oh, okay, that's okay. Wow. Yeah. That sweater is really long, and the hair, because it's like, yeah, the hair, and granted it was suburban New Jersey. So like it would kind of stay big for quite a while,
Hmm.
but just kind of figuring out and like, what the different girls, how they would look and how they would wear their hair and what they would be wearing, for this adventure, was really, really interesting. And yeah, you have your memories, but it's always better to, rely on a little research to get things more accurate.
Absolutely, but I just love the fact that you got a bunch of old magazines to research. I mean, it makes sense, but
Yeah.
I guess I never would have thought of something like that because I don't know. It's fantastic.
Yeah. YM and, yeah. And
Um,
17 were the other ones I picked up.
I never actually heard of Sassy magazine. I just had to Google it really quick.
Oh, Sassy is the best. It's, I think in a way it's like a lot of women remember Sassy pretty fondly, and because of I think it's politics,
Hmm.
as well. Like I think, it did really well and kind of really mobilized, people and made them think differently about stuff. So it's, yeah, no, it's a definite touchstone for a lot of people.
Yeah, it definitely seems a bit different than 17, given that the headline
Hmm.
for one that I'm looking at is "A Day in the Life of Miss America, Indentured Servant." Doesn't seem like 17 type material.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the fact that each of the four leads have their own. Obviously they have their own identities as people and how Brian wrote them, but they also have their own visual identities that really, kind of they match their personalities really well. How much like what's your process for coming together with like the looks of characters? Like, do you just kind of look at the script and kind of visualize from there, or like what's the process? Do you talk it out with Brian at all?
Uh, with I didn't start designing the characters until I got the script. I needed to know what they sounded like.
Sure.
I needed to know what they would be doing.
Hmm.
I had a rough idea of it. But the whole process was kind of just, it took a long time,
Yeah.
between when like we started talking about the book, which was in like April, to finally getting a script, maybe in like October, I think. Um,
Was that
you know,
2014?
yeah,
Yeah, okay. Wow.
no, 2015, no, 2014. Yeah, 2014. So because we just talked about it, and then he kind of went to go think more about it, and then we were working out um, stuff slowly with Image, and he was just waiting for me to be finished with Wonder Woman as well. So there wasn't really any like big rush. But the
Hmm.
nice part about that is we would just check in with each other, every month or two, and then be like, hey, what do you think? And then kind of build it from there. So I had like the one-liner descriptions, but I didn't want to start really sketching them out until I knew what they'd have to do in the course of the story. So um, once I read the script, I think I had a good idea of who they were. I
Hmm.
didn't really have like a lot of questions. Like it was, I knew the kind of girl Erin was. Erin is probably the closest to me simply because she's Asian and I'm pulling so much of my childhood to fill out her house,
Hmm.
and I think a lot about, the way she is and how, you'll see this more in future issues, but just, the way she's a good girl. They're all very nice, but like she's like this obedient child, like
Hmm.
she's kind of almost stereotypically, this really great Asian American kid, um, and the for the other characters, what I wanted to do was make sure we had, the individual, kind of ticks that Brian would give them, that we showed those visually, but not kind of clobber you over the head with it, so like KJ is our jock character, but like, the obvious thing would be for her to, have a baseball bat and a glove and like,
Hmm.
a cap, uh, with the ponytail sticking out of it, and it's just, but we've seen that so much,
Right.
and it doesn't have any impact anymore, and it's actually pretty lazy,
Hmm.
uh, so we said, well, what's, and I suggested to Brian, well, what about something like field hockey? Field hockey is like this great sport that girls in particular really get into at a certain age. and then kind of don't really come back to it. Like it's very rare to find like the professional, like field hockey player.
Yeah.
I mean, even soccer now is like so much bigger, but field hockey almost stays with many people like as part of like their youth.
It's very of their age for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and he loved it, and just, the idea of it, she looks badass with this, this field hockey stick just strapped to her back.
I just have to say really quick, I love that it's a field hockey. I don't even know, stick. I guess.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I saw somebody coming after me with a baseball bat, theoretically, it would be intimidating, but I'd be like, I know what I'm dealing with. The field hockey stick, I'm like, what am I dealing with? There's something more threatening about it.
They hurt. I seem to remember that. And then, and also with Mac and with Tiffany, it was just, like finding out like, what other, differences, how individual can we make them, and the more they felt like real kids and less like caricatures, the better they would actually hang together as a group, because then you don't see them as being like 100% this way, 100% that way, they're not like points on a compass,
Yeah.
They're actually just more like this, this weird Venn diagram, and they all kind of converge around, being cool and independent and delivering papers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because growing up, my favorite movie, like I probably watched it 200 times, was The Goonies.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this kind of feels like a very similar like touchstone of that period in the same way, except for it features girls, which I think is a fantastic angle that we didn't see as much back then. But you've worked quite a bit with stories that star women. You obviously did Wonder Woman, but I remember there was a very you did a Brave and the Bold issue that was like basically like a ladies' night before the Killing Joke hit, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, is that something that's coincidental, like in terms of your career, or do you just do you actually prefer stories that star women?
It's a little bit coincidental.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of both, I would say. I mean, I enjoy stories with women in them. I think because with male characters, particularly if you're drawing superhero books, there's an aversion to any sort of interiority, because in superhero comics, the male characters really embody action more than anything else. And they're afraid to have them think or pause or really be about their character, their fear, their insecurities in any way. And as a result, when you're going to do anything with any sort of emotion to it, you have to have female characters, or else to get anywhere with it.
Right.
And somehow, somewhat early in my career, I like drawing women, and people started to notice that and like it. So it just kind of went from there. So I've been kind of tagged with it, and not without, not unhappily, but it's a bit of both. And I think with this kind of younger coming of age story, I think it is really interesting to look at it from a girl's point of view. One of the things that Brian has said specifically about it is like 12 is an age in 1988 where you were free to be a kid, and you probably you weren't overly concerned about like the opposite sex.
Right.
You weren't thinking about like love and dating and getting into all the messy adult stuff, but you're still figuring yourself out, who, what you like, what you're into, who your friends are. So it is a really interesting point in time. And it's one that I think, even though, we're guys, we can sympathize and empathize with 12-year-old girls a lot easier than, if we were, say, trying to write a story about like 17-year-old girls, where like at that point in my life, I don't know how much I understood about women at all,
right,
and could even like identify what was going on and remember what, how they would have reacted to certain things, So there's something kind of pure about doing this as a preteen book rather than something later.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it totally comes through in the book too, because 12 feels kind of like it's like the last age where it's okay to still be a kid
Yeah,
in the general
yeah,
sense of the world.
yeah.
And one thing that I really liked about the book is, for Erin, like she's definitely like she kind of feels like the kid who's like new to this world and is like totally, like I said, a fangirl of Mac and everything like that. But one difference between genders and everything is, I like the moment where Mac offers Erin, a cigarette, and she says no way. But I kind of feel like if it was a kid or like a boy, he probably would have said yes, just because like boys want to be perceived as being cool, even no matter the age. And like for a character like Erin to say no, it kind of shows the strength within her. And I think that even though she like totally is like, I love this girl, she's totally
Yeah,
awesome.
right.
It's a really nice little moment in there. But so one thing I looking at the covers for the first three issues and just kind of the book in general, there's a lot of hot pinks and yellows and blues and kind of like neons in general. They kind of feel like the unofficial colors of the project. Was that just something you guys wanted to include just because those were kind of colors of the time, or was it just the colors that felt right for the book?
Um, they were the right colors for the time.
Mm-hmm.
It because one of the things that I've been very kind of hyper aware of, even going back to like the Creeper,
Yeah.
was that when you do a period book, you need to evoke the
Mm-hmm.
period sensibility without knocking people over the head with it, because
Yeah.
it just becomes, we didn't. If you were too beholden to, say, the 1920s or whatever, for Beware the Creeper, it just would have looked like a weird Merchant Ivory film, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and that doesn't work, But if you say take a look at some of the poster design of the time and you pick those colors, and then you can get somewhere. You get something that looks interesting. And with Paper Girls, it was that logo is directly influenced by Sassy and
Mm-hmm.
Interview magazine, and with the book in general, my feeling was, this is a comic, but I'm so sick of comics. Like the way they're designed, the way they cram everything on the front. It's like this is a magazine. This is a magazine that comes out, every month, or it's going to come out monthly and then get collected. But like, let's treat this differently. Let's treat this like something you might want to hold on to, as opposed to this 32 pages of advertising,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. So it's like we wanted to give people like slightly better paper stock and hopefully a nicer cover, and just make people want to buy the thing, and
Right.
hold it. And that when they got it, they didn't feel like, I didn't want to feel like I was tricking anybody into buying it
Mm-hmm.
somehow, and then leave them with like this, this crappy, piece of, pile of paper.
Yeah.
So the magazine thing was really big, so the logo and the paper color, the paper stock, and the color on the covers is also very deliberate, because, we don't have Superman or Batman or Wonder Woman on the cover. I don't have to tell you that their costumes are red and blue and gray or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And it's just these characters. So I could draw them, stick one color over the whole thing, and have it pop from, the rest of the stuff that's on the stands, that is trying to compete with it, trying to compete with everything else on the stands with, glows and grads and,
Right.
and metallic logos and whatnot. And, just have it be simple, put it out there, and so, hopefully people will see it and be curious about it, because it doesn't look like whatever is next to it.
Did you actually go into a shop and like after the book came out at all?
Yeah, I've been at Forbidden Planet and Midtown Comics just for signings and stuff like that, and it's like, it was really cool. It was like, wow, that actually worked.
It does. It does. It's like it's actually amazing. Like so my shop in Anchorage, Alaska, Bosco's Comics. Like you look at it. First off, they ordered a ton of it, which is atypical for them for image books actually. But they ordered a ton of it, and like looking at the stands, like it was amazing how much that yellow popped. Like
Hmm.
I'm a big covers fan, and like one of the things that kind of infuriates me as somebody who likes covers is it just seems like there's not a lot of effort to like there's a lot of effort in making it look cool, but not in a way that looks different than anything else. And I think different, like different if it's planned out in a way that fits the story. can make such a huge difference for like the random, Wednesday warrior going through the stands and like deciding whether or not they want to even pick it up to look at it.
Yeah. Well, I think you have just a lot of cross purposes. People they want to advertise their book, but at the same time, if it's a like a mainstream superhero book, you have a different artist usually on the cover. They're trying to produce a really nice illustration, which can definitely sell the book. But everybody's trying to like put their all into it, but it's not about a cohesive message.
Mm-hmm.
So for Paper Girls, it was kind of difficult at me for times to just step back and say, no, I'm just going to draw this in black and white,
mm-hmm.
and throw one color over it and maybe have an accent color, and then but once I knew that, I sketched out all 5 covers like in the same night, just to make sure that it would work as a whole, and going forward that it would be some kind of template to work off of. So, I do feel weird when I finish a cover in like, a couple hours, but as opposed to spending like 2 or 3 days on it the way I usually do,
yeah,
like Wonder Woman covers and stuff like that. So it's so it was a calculated risk, I guess, to go so simple with it, but I don't think anybody cares, because it's like, look, if I drew, the Avengers that way and just put one color over it, people would be like, you're being lazy, but people don't know, they don't have any expectations of this. And that's what I enjoyed the most, is that, there hasn't been 60 years of Paper Girls comics.
Right.
No one's going to be telling me they liked, George Perez's version of the Paper Girls best.
Mm-hmm.
Brian and I, we can just tell this story and that's it. Like that's how they experience it, and because we didn't do any variant covers and stuff like that, it's just very, very direct. And I think it's close to communicating with us directly as possible. Short of sitting with Brian in a bar and me making like hand gestures behind him or something like that, it's that I think it's very personal, and I hope that comes through in the design and in the packaging.
Absolutely. Well, I never actually thought of it like that before. I mean, it's interesting to think of the difference between working on like Wonder Woman and in a book like Paper Girls in this strictly the creative process. But I never really thought about the difference between like the weight of expectations and the difference between that, because it's not like you're going to be referencing like Paper Girls number 35 or something like that in like a quick notation or something, because this is the first time Paper Girls ever existed.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of I talked to you for that creator owned piece that I did, and you had talked about how one of the most important things for you for going to creator owned was just the freedom that it provided. And it seems like you're definitely getting a chance to do that, both with with the covers and like having a double size first issue, which I loved. I thought that was fantastic. But I gotta give you guys a lot of credit. I love the back matter. I love the American Newspaper Delivery Guild. I love like the introduction to the Guild Local 412 and all that. Like I thought that was like those little elements and like the school pictures of the entire creative team. I thought that was fantastic, and it made me, I don't know, it made me feel like more personally connected to the book, which was a great thing.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, it's a big part of, I think, why we respond to anything. And being doing a creator-owned book now, especially with Image, they've been so supportive about everything. They've been really great about just whatever creative decisions we want to make, and they've been great about just everything else. I mean, they have like compared to like a larger company, they're really running on like a skeleton crew, and they all work so hard, and I just really appreciate everybody there, and how they've allowed us to, enabled us to get our vision out there. But it's I think people really want in all art to kind of connect with that artist on some level. You're either connecting with their viewpoint, or you're just responding to the story that they're telling. But at the same time, it's people like to know where their stuff comes from these days. Eric Stevenson talked about this in the Image Expo that where we announced Paper Girls. How everything is going striving for authenticity. We
Mm-hmm.
go for locally grown food. We go for, artisanal, mayonnaise, which is like an actual store up the block from me. Um, you know, but people want to know where things come from. They
Right.
want to know who's making them. They want to know why they're making them. And in this age of kind of Twitter and everything, they can actually find out. And if your product is anonymous, if it doesn't have your fingerprints on it, if it doesn't have your DNA in it somewhere, if it is, then it doesn't work. I mean, even Apple. Think about Apple. How many iPhones are sold
Mm-hmm.
every year? iPads, whatever. But you watch that iPad, the Apple announcements, and the videos that they put up, and those feel like testimonials.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They know that they're talking to an audience that wants, to be given something and to be made to feel special, and also to be part of a community.
Right.
And that's a desire. That's a really, really strong desire in all of us. And I think with all the proliferation of really great creator-owned books now, you had a piece on it, just last week or so about the back matter, about letter columns.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the additional way where the creative team can reach out to the audience and be accessible to them, and that for the audience to feel more of that, more of those fingerprints on the whole book.
Yeah. It's funny. As soon as I finished reading the first issue, I like turned to my wife and I was like, "I'm gonna send this in. I want to be part of the guild." And she's like, she just I think thought it was ridiculous because I was so excited about becoming part of a newspaper delivery guild. But I don't know. I mean, it's like one thing that I've always thought was interesting about comics, and I think it's kind of this way in TV too. Maybe a little bit less in movies, but we're definitely moving towards an era where it seems like specialization of audiences to a certain degree. Like you can aim your book or your TV show at a specific audience and you can survive on like lower sales or ratings or whatever because there's different avenues to do it in. Like creator owned, like the economics of that is completely different than what Marvel or DC is doing. So you can create something that maybe not be for everybody, but that's okay because you don't need everyone to succeed in today's era of comics. And if that means more things like Paper Girls or other comics I love, I think that's a tremendous thing.
The irony of it is that by not targeting the usual, or using the usual kind of comics, subject matter,
Mm-hmm.
is that you end up creating something that actually probably is more universal.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's funny because but it's like, are you going to try and do, was Raina Telgemeier going to get her books out through through Marvel or DC?
mm-hmm.
Was that going to happen? I don't think so. But those books are now out there for so many people to read.
Yeah,
Um, and in the same way, like, yeah, it's, if we were doing this book somewhere else, we'd have different. It's different. It's a different game. It's a different. There are different expectations, and you can certainly play by that and succeed and do great work. But for me, after having done that for almost 15 years, it was time to try something else.
yeah, yeah. And I think that you're exactly right in the fact that you can approach universal themes in like everyone was 12 once, and like with Reina, it's like I'm not necessarily the target market, but I think I first read Smile when I was like 29, and I'm a guy, and I saw so much of myself in that book because like those themes are universal. Those are things that everybody's gone through. You don't have to be one type of person to do that. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I love seeing those types of things. But I did want to ask: did you or anyone on the team ever deliver papers before?
Uh, Ironically, no.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. It's none of us did. We have lots of friends who did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Brian definitely did his research on it all. But yeah, uh, not having a paper delivery person on staff might hurt us a bit. But there've been plenty of people who've been happy to let us know about details and stuff. So that's good. I mean, it is funny when you learn about people who have done it, and I think it's a very, very formative experience in working uh, that young.
Uh-huh.
Having responsibilities like that. Like it's a you can kind of see the people who did that, and like how they, may have, that may have informed, their career choices or how they work going forward.
Oh yeah, I mean like that part where Mac's talking about having to shake down the guy and then she just gave up on him and she doesn't serve him anymore. I was like, wow, I wish I learned that when I was 12. But
Yeah, I'm really hoping we get to do like just one issue about going around and collecting money from people,
yeah,
because it's got to be the craziest thing. You're like 12 and trying to, you know, I don't know, some creepy, dude comes to the, to the door and doesn't want to pay you, and like, what happens then?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was funny because I always wanted to be a paperboy. I think it was partially because of the game Paperboy. Uh, but well, which actually kind of makes being a paperboy seem terrible to be honest. Um, but there was like you would see it in movies and TV shows, and it just seemed so cool. And in Alaska, we didn't exactly have that option because everyone would deliver by car because it gets kind of cold up here. But the last thing I want to talk to you about is, your art in the book in general, like what your approach is. And, you've always been kind of, I hate using the term, like simple because it seems insulting, but you approach comics in a very clean and simple way that doesn't like, you don't go crazy with splash pages and like try to overdo design on the pages or anything like that. But when it comes to like paper girls, like what's your approach for laying out the book? Is it, are you mostly kind of going off of script, or are you kind of figuring things out on layouts as you go along, or what is it?
Usually I'm, trying to stick to the script, but, and Brian's, really great, really open to changes to it, as long as, it doesn't affect like, things that he cares about, like page turns and
Sure.
and that kind of thing. Um, if anything, I might move a panel here or there to another page just to allow something to breathe a little bit more.
Absolutely.
But he's very conscious of the page turn, and I think you can tell it because there's a pace to reading his books, and then and you flip through them in a certain way that it's that's part of the language of comics, and often that gets lost.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I wanted Brian and I are very similar in the way we like to pace our comics. When I write my own stuff, I think it kind of has there's a pacing to it, a kind of moment to moment kind of action
Mm-hmm.
that to me feels like like this. It's not animation. It's not like reading a storyboard, but is very much one of the thrills for me of making comics and reading comics when they have that kind of you can kind of follow. Each panel kind of comes a second or two after the other one.
Mm-hmm.
When you do it right, it's great.
Right.
So, but with the drawing and everything, I was trying to figure out like, is there a way that we can communicate better with less? And like, so a lot of it now, it's a lot more open than other work I've done in the past, because I know I can trust Matt Wilson to do something really beautiful, and then
Mm-hmm.
without needing to fill like cram something into every open space. I think the whole thing breathes a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just following the story, and hopefully it's designed like the panels are composed in a way that it doesn't feel like it's empty.
Mm-hmm.
That you're, and if it feels considered like that, then that's great. Because if you start, there are people for whom if there's no backgrounds or what then people don't feel like they're getting their money's worth. Like if you compare it to kind of certain kinds of historical French albums,
Mm-hmm.
stuff that takes place, like in the past, knights on horseback, stuff like that. It's like, and you see a castle and they're drawing every brick because they have a different idea of like how much background detail there needs to be in a panel.
Right.
If you contrast that with manga, and I was reading a lot of 20th Century Boys and Pluto,
Yeah.
to kind of get at that kind of immediacy.
Mm-hmm.
Manga is very much more my style in terms of like the temporal nature of the pacing, and seeing the kind of impact that Urasawa would have with just one panel that wasn't a splash page.
Mm-hmm.
Often there are big beats that are just one panel out of six, on a
Yeah.
page, and it works so well. And then when you do get a big moment, like that means something else. So there's a language that you have to work with that, and almost like it's an unspoken kind of thing where you just, this panel needs to be something, it needs to be memorable. How do you build to that? Does it need to be the biggest thing on the page? What if it's not? What if it's smaller, but it's the right look? Because all you need is for it to be a close-up of somebody. I remember hearing, I used to be an apprentice for Walt Simonson a long time ago when I was starting out, and learned so much from him. And we were joking about how, like, you would just get extreme close-ups of someone's face, and then it kind of devolved, I think, at one point to someone actually just drawing someone's eyeball, like, and using a whole splash page for it, if not a double page spread. And, I looked at that, and it's just like, it's such an incredible waste of space that there's no way in the world that drawing that image on that big of a panel, like, has the impact that you want it to have. So it's better to limit, if that's the important panel to you, then you can have that composition, you can have that thing, but then you need to build to that, with other panels, and not waste space like that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I never would have probably put the two together on its own, but I actually had never read 20th Century Boys before this year, and I have to admit, I was like a hopeless addict to it as I was going through, because it's so phenomenal. But like, out of probably all the books that I've read this year, all the comics I've read this year, I would say that and like Paper Girls #1 were probably the books that I enjoyed the most. In both for the same reason. Like when you're reading 20th Century Boys, I just love how he delivers this story, and like he's not like rushing anything. It's a really long story, but at no point. Like he accomplishes so much story, but he never rushes anything. It never feels like he's trying to get through a scene to get to a story beat. It just feels so character oriented, and that's part of the reason why you get so invested in characters like Kenji and everyone else. But like when in Paper Girls #1, I'm looking at those 2 pages where it's Aaron getting ready for work, and it's completely wordless. And the thing that I really like about that, and again, 20th Century Boys, is the fact that it feels very immersive. Like, you guys take time to like build the world, but also like, introduce us to the characters and how they act and move and everything like that. And I don't know. I mean, I can totally see that, and it kind of blows my mind that I never even thought of something like that before.
Yeah, it was when I got the script. I know how deliberate Brian is, and when I saw those pages, I kind of laughed, because I was like, oh, I can see how he wants this to be. Yeah, he wants it to be immersive, and to have those silent panels. He had done so much great kind of and in some places real kind of high wire work in the script, and at that point he was throwing it to me, saying like, all right, do it. Like, I know you can do this silent, these silent pages, and get the feeling across without having any dialogue. And so for me, yeah, those pages were not difficult, but like there was an extra challenge to make them flow without having balloons, to make you look where you needed to look. And but it was a great challenge. And one of the things that I really love about the script is how it gives you a lot of information, but it never, I don't think, hits you over the head with any of it. And at the same time, it just kind of pulls you through really gently. But if you're looking for this really kind of bombastic storytelling, it might not be right for you, But this is like, it's very controlled, and it pulls you all the way through to the end, where it surprises you. And it's a weird little story, but and it's going to get really, really weird in the upcoming issues. But I really appreciate that about the first issue, where often first issues are so rushed.
Plot. Introduce characters.
Plot. I mean, yeah. Usually it's just like pages and pages of exposition to then take you to the first plot point,
right?
Which is a cliffhanger. But it's like but you're finally learning that the thing that we wanted to make sure that, like, by the end of the book, you knew more about the characters than you did from the solicitation material and from the previews. And that we had gotten you to a point where the story was going to go in a different direction. So many books just stop. Their last page is just the fulfillment of whatever the log line for the book was.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at that the 2 pages, and I've heard some writers and artists say things like if you had 10 different artists draw 1 page of script, you'd have it 10 different ways. And
Yeah,
like I look at the first and third panels on that page, and like I have to imagine a lot of people would probably scrap those. It's just Aaron flipping the light switch with her elbow, and then like the page where it shows like the no progress in Iraq peace talks on the front page of the Cleveland Preserver. Like, I guess you could do those pages without it, but I mean, like, I like the Erin one. The top panel shows a little bit about Erin and how she deals with problems, and like the other one sets up the setting and the date and everything, and it's just like I don't know. I guess I like that because they may not be necessary panels, but they enrich the experience for me, and and
yeah.
and, and I love it. But I know you have to probably go pretty soon, so I just want to say thank you for coming on and talking Paper Girls with me. It was a great time chatting.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. I mean, it's been great to see how people are reading the book and liking it, and like how they're poring over it. People have already translated our alien language. It's great to see that kind of enthusiasm for the book, and we hope we can live up to everyone's expectations for the book. And keep coming out with something cool for them.
Yeah, well, I'm excited for number 2 and whatever weird stuff is coming our way later.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cliff.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Cliff Chiang, on Twitter at Cliff Chiang, on the web at cliffchiang.com, and his work in Paper Girls at Image Comics. You can find more Sketch content at Sketched, that's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at SketchedComic, and like us on Facebook @/Sketched. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.